Welcome to State of Ed, a podcast about education inside the classroom and out. My name is Nick Simone.
And I'm Mark Isix.
And Mark is a little bit, he's not under the weather, right, Mark? But your voice is a little bit lost today.
I got something going on. I'm at the tail end of it, so I apologize to everyone, but I'm definitely a trooper and I'm here for a really great conversation today.
Yes, we're very, very excited to have our guests today. So, our guests today are Koehler and John Sammon. With over 2 decades of experience each, they are dedicated to integrating 21st century skills into project-based learning. As professional development specialists in New York, they prioritized hands-on learning, rejecting a one-size-fits-all model in favor of personalized, dynamic environments. Tara and John's approach to education centers on empowering educators and engaging students in meaningful learning experiences, making significant strides in educational methodologies and practices. Their mission is to have project-based learning become a common practice in as many classrooms as possible. Tara and John have also co-authored many articles and have a brand new book called The Tapas Approach to Project-Based Learning, a culinary map for educators on the transformative power of PBL. Tara and John, welcome to State of Ed Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Nick.
Mark and I are very, very much looking forward to this conversation. You are definitely focusing on a topic that intrigues us very well. So first, if you want to just maybe talk a little bit about what brought you to bringing out this book at this time in your educational journey.
Sure. So Tara and I are STEAM PD specialists in our district, and we've been infusing elements of PBL in the district, and it's just been growing and growing, and we've been attending some conferences. You want to tell them about the conference story, about what really launched it?
Yeah, we were at NICEgate a couple of years ago, and we decided to present on PBL Tapas, breaking PBL down into just smaller bites. In that conference, it was actually the last day, the day everyone was going home, and we ended up having a standing room only that day, which was the most attendance we've ever had in any conference we've presented at. On the way out the door, I looked at John and I said, I think this is the topic we should write a book on. We'd been talking about writing a book, and the whole drive home, he's driving and I'm typing on my phone all of the initial ideas for what could be with writing a book on PBL Tapas. We just think it's a big need in education.
The best part is that the book is totally different than those initial notes.
Totally.
Everything's totally changed from that
point.
point.
The iterative process that we've gone through is pretty profound.
But it's fun. It's a fun process.
Well, first, before we talk specifically about the book, what's your classroom experience as educators? And then what experience do you personally have with project-based learning?
So I've been in education for over 20 years. I've primarily worked at the elementary, middle school levels, various grade levels, various subject matters. I've been employing elements of project-based learning since I was a student teacher, with putting archaeological dig sites in classrooms to try and bring those environments to kids. So where we are now, 20 plus years later, I'm a STEAM professional development specialist. I work in 5 buildings within our district, 5 elementary buildings. And then we'll do in-services and different workshops where we communicate with middle school and high school teachers.
Great.
In my classroom, so I was in the classroom for 17 years. A lot of those years were in the primary grades. And just like John, I definitely was implementing different elemental pieces of PBL. It was when I spent my last few years in a 3rd grade classroom that I started to dive a little bit deeper. I wanted to level up engagement for my students. I wanted to see them just apply their knowledge in a different way for a greater audience. And I also felt that I never had enough time to get to everything. So I started to think, how can I bring some interdisciplinary work from my readers, writers workshop and my social studies curriculum and my science curriculum and start to merge those disciplines together and have students create products for, really it was the school community. We weren't outside of the building yet. It was really all products for families to come visit and see, and school personnel.
I think as we're moving forward, the idea of disengaged students is really what has become the paramount piece for us that drives it. Students today are a little bit different. There's a lot of right stimulation for them, And we were struggling, and we wanted to really find methodologies that engage children in learning in a very different way.
Overstimulation for sure.
Yeah.
Just real quick, so your experience and your passion, you have tremendous credibility. Just curious, now how long have you guys known each other?
We'll be quick on the story. So we've been working with each other for 6 years, 6
yeah.
years
Okay.
at this point, in the school district that we're in.
And actually, the first day that John joined our school district, we met at a makerspace lab. I was one of 2 elementary teachers invited to go to the makers lab that day. And it was our brand new STEAM professional development specialist, John Sammon's first day on the job. And I was showing him pictures of some of the learning experiences that were going on in my classroom. I had Ozobots. Students created these models of the water cycle, and they had Ozobots, moving through the water cycle. And I said to John, hey, anytime you want to come in my classroom, come on in. And then that's how our partnership started. And then they created another position in the district that was a PD specialist. And here I am. So we've been partners in PD specialist field for 5 years.
And that's wonderful. And the reason I bring it up is because when you guys have 2 decades of experience, so much has changed in education during that time. So there are times when people that haven't been in the classroom enough are trying to talk about topics, but they don't really understand what the teachers have been dealing with. So you have enormous credibility with that type of extensive classroom experience.
The interesting part in our current position, most people will look at PD specialists or literacy coaches, right, as they're known in the business. And they think of them as being removed from classrooms. And I think in some districts they are. 90% of the time we are in classrooms modeling lessons, working with students every single day.
Right.
Like that is the aspect of our job every day. And we're fortunate because we have hundreds of classrooms and students that we get to work with. Yeah, so it's a great, we're granted a great experience in the position that we have, because we get to have our one foot in theory and concept and another foot in practicality. And how do we really make these things work so that they're actually become part of the fabric of a classroom? And so that's really what our job is. It's not just theory, but it's practice.
And it's exciting because when we show up in classrooms, we're like mini celebrities.
We're like the cool aunt and uncle.
We are. It's so much fun. They light up and smile, and you see them in the hall and they're waving and so excited, and their eyes light up, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have great personalities and your passion is so obvious. I can only imagine you must be tremendous teachers and presenters, because you can sense the enthusiasm, from everything you're saying.
Well, Nick, I think that one of the reasons that we wrote the book was we are so passionate about this practice, and we do believe it's not just what students need, but I feel like after so many years in a classroom, I think it could really help light up a teacher as well. And we've seen that happen. We've seen it light up our teachers as much as it's lit up our students. And in particular this year, lighting up administrators. We had an administrator say to us at a PBL event that we had, you guys have so much passion for this, and you could see it, and you could see it, the excitement in the students and the families. And so I honestly, why we both left the classroom, I think, right, is that we believe in this so much.
To
we
inspire more.
Yeah, spread it like confetti.
Yeah. We're very fortunate though. We have, our central office staff and the central administration superintendent are all highly supportive.
Our board of ed. Yeah.
They show up at the celebratory events that we have for PBL all the time. And they just encourage it. So it's a really great experience that we get to have. Yeah.
I know as a co-author there, Mark is going to want to dig right into the book immediately. I just have one more defining question. So, because a lot of people just love to throw these buzzwords around, and they don't really have any substantive explanation behind it. When you think about project-based learning, PBL, from a practical standpoint for the teacher, do you view it I'm talking about the time constraints of a classroom. Do you view it as it can be a 5-minute lesson, a 15-minute lesson, a 40-minute lesson, a 3-day unit, a 7-day unit, all of the above? Like when you think about defining what project-based learning means.
All the above.
Again, from a practical all the above. Okay. So
It,
you
it
do,
really
It's all the
can.
above.
It could be as small or as large as you want it to be. And the intention's never to make a teacher feel like this is a burden or something extra. And we don't want to take away from them getting through what they have to get through as far as their curriculum goes. And so this is just an enhancement and just a different way for students to interact with their learning.
We call it fundamentally shifting how students interact with their knowledge. That's basically what we say PBL is.
Mark's going to steal that, by the way.
I
He'll give
like
you
that.
credit.
No,
I know
steal it.
Mark well enough.
We got to quote it in the book, Mark. But it
I'll
is
give
literally
credit.
like
I always give credit.
the
Yeah.
essence of those words. It is fundamentally shifting how they interact with their knowledge. That's what
Yeah.
we're looking at.
Oh yeah,
I love
Mark will be using that at his next workshop in our school. But
No,
I'll
yeah.
make sure
Use it.
Yeah,
he'll
use it.
give you credit because I know him and I know that resonated with him tremendously.
He does know me well. It did resonate for sure.
Thank you for that answer. And then you go, because that's my concern is always that sometimes teachers feel as if it means you have to teach the entire year this way.
Oh,
or
no,
it
no.
should be all of the above. It
We don't
should be-
actually recommend doing like elemental pieces, yes, but you work up to it. I don't think you can live in that euphoric state of PBL, 180 days a year. It's just, I don't think it's possible. And if someone has figured it out, good for them. Please tell
Right.
us how you figured it out.
So the Tapas approach, obviously we have the culinary theme, right? And so in part of the book, we talk about the idea of a kitchen thermometer and how it's cool, medium, and hot. And what your integration is in relationship to that is very different. It could be one piece elemental, or it could be elemental strewn through a unit, or it could be this full-blown magical experience. It really is
Right.
up to you as the educator to decide. And we're just kind of giving guidance and steps and what we've found as the bumps and bruises along the way to go through as practical suggestions.
Right. And like John just completed PBL in about, 2 weeks time, but then we have other PBLs that were across 3 months. So there are varying levels of how much time to spend on it. And that can
That's
all be
great.
worked out.
Yeah.
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 And you use the metaphor, the Tapas approach. Why do you believe it's necessary to introduce ideas like PBL in such small bites?
Because
It's massive.
it's a very dynamic learning arrangement for an educator to think about how they're going to go about doing it. So in order to do it and be conscious of all the pieces that you want to be present, you're going to want to take small bites. It's like eating the whale. There's no way you're going to do it in one bite. It's just not going to happen. So the practical approach is take those small bites and you're going to have success. And ultimately your students are going to have success and you're going to get greater outcomes because that's what we're here for, right? Or learning outcomes for our kids.
And truth be told, we started out with an in-service in our district that was massive. It was the whole full meal. It was like Thanksgiving dinner. Okay. And teachers weren't really following through with implementation. And then when we
use the metaphor, they choked on it.
They choked on it. And we didn't anticipate that because we digested it in a way, like we were fine, but we had already been doing the PBL work. And one of our colleagues in our office, one of the tech integrators, had said, they had us on their podcast and they had actually said to us, all of this sounds great, but very overwhelming. So how do you get started with this? And it was in that moment that we were like, oh my goodness, we chunk learning for our students. Why aren't we chunking learning for educators with PBL? And that's when we came up with, PBL Tapas. We reran the in-service course in our district. We had a great attendance, great implementation from that, went and presented at NICEGATE on that. And in that moment, the idea of the book was born.
Yeah.
Yeah, but teachers are so overwhelmed with everything. No, there's no teacher out there who feels like they have plenty of room to work in all kinds of new things. So there's this moment of panic. Well, how am I supposed to do this and that? And I think what I'm hearing you say is it's not the combination. It's how do you do this through that?
Yes.
A lot of times you'll hear PBL and constructivism, and it's different than explicit direct instruct. And actually, when you really understand what PBL is, it's infusing all these methodologies. Direct instruct is part of it. Small group work is part of it. Workshop is part of it. Constructivism and inquiry is part of it. And so having all of that as an understanding, you need small bites.
Yeah, you kind of touched on what my next question was going to be is, Does your work primarily focus more on students doing things individually or within small groups? Do you like a combination of the project?
We definitely, it can be a little bit of both. Usually when we come up with a product in the end, it is a collaborative effort. Like rarely do we have a student coming up with,
I would say never.
yeah,
They're always
almost,
collaborative at the end.
yeah,
The big community, real world products. Yes.
yeah, are typically collaborative. And so that definitely creates an environment to set children up for life skills in the end. I mean, think about how many adults don't play nice. So we set up environments for students where they learn how to play nice with others and how to compromise and collaborate,
But understand in between, though, there are direct instruct lessons where you need to show children skills. If it's a math-based skill or it's a literacy-based skill, we just did one where children were drafting different novels for Maria Ferrari's Children's Hospital. And so they're writing authentic text, real-world products. And in doing so, there are subset skills that they need to be shown explicitly in order to achieve the task of what the project is asking them to do. And so, as Tara was saying, the collaborative act, the small group work, but there's the direct instruct where I am doing things independently as well, where I have to work on these skills independently.
In the book's subtitle, you describe PBL as transformative. So what makes it so powerful?
Can I jump on this one?
sure.
So authenticity and real world products. Whenever we want to have a PBL conversation, it's those two pieces that start it. Because authenticity and real world products transform learning from passive experiences to meaningful journeys, right? We think of it as designing learning experiences, not teaching children. And so it's the foundation on which PBL thrives. It provides opportunities for students that textbooks and lectures cannot, because our students are creating something for someone. This is that fundamental shift we were talking about, Mark. We're using our knowledge to create something for someone. It's not a contrived version of reality where I have to answer some test questions and hand it into the teacher as my only audience, or I'm writing a letter and it goes to my teacher, again, the only audience. As an example, we've worked with community partners, Central Hudson, a local utility company in our area. We've worked with them for a couple of years. Kids have created VR experiences, developed web pages, recently drafted informational books. And so they're creating these books for Central Hudson, the dedicated employees, but then they share it on their webpage to go out to the greater community, which is all of their customer base. So when the children are doing this, they're actually creating something for someone. There's a user in mind. This is so far beyond the idea of that contrived reality of, oh, this is a real world problem where, Jimmy's got X amount of toys that are in a box. It's a real problem.
John had mentioned we just had students write books, digital books for Maria Ferrari's Children's Hospital. And I had a third grade class working on it. And they get through their book and they're moving into their next writing unit, which were research books on animals. And a very similar topic to what we wrote books about for the hospital. And the teacher contacted me to say, oh my goodness, my students asked me, so who are we making these books for? Because they like labored for a couple of months on these books because it wasn't worked on every day. It was like scattered throughout the week. And they enjoy working hard when they know who it's for.
When you're also in this authentic real world scenario, the community partners that they're doing it for, it lives and breathes in the real world. It affords you as an educator an opportunity to put them in roles that mirror societal roles. So they can be project managers or graphic designers or content experts or personalities. And so in those roles, they get to assume different perspectives or lenses, and they understand what real problem solving is because they get to see it from these different lights.
And like this year, we had several classes that were writing books. So they had the role of co-author, and we would tell them we're co-authors right now. And this is, the process we're going through. It helps them, when they could connect, oh, this is really happening.
I had a professor years ago who used to call these things live events, and how that really raises the stakes for students. But what you're also doing in addition to a live event is that you're leveraging technology the way technology is supposed to be leveraged, not just simply to replace one thing with another. Yeah. I'm not going to use, the chalkboard. I'll use the Proxima. I won't use the Proxima. I'll use a screen. And you're not just replacing something or supplementing someone with, something with quizzes. This is using the technology to have an impact on their community. So they're learning, they're demonstrating their understanding, and they're making a difference in their world. And they're using technology to do things that they couldn't have done 15, 20 years ago, at least as seamlessly without it. So it's really the intersection of all the different things that we hope for our kids and we hope for our classrooms. It's wonderful.
It's great that you say that. In the Maria Ferrari's project that we were talking about, we had some students where, we've been working with AI, and we know that's the buzzword, but there's a particular AI platform that's out there that you can have a student interface where it's data safe. And so it was a fear because AI is new, and we're sitting back wondering, okay, how are the kids going to interact? Are they just going to take from it? But you realize the human spirit is actually a pretty awesome one, because as the kids started to create their own work, because they had to create their own original drafts and then use AI as an editor to support them. And so they didn't want AI making it for them. One of the kids turns around and goes, "Oh my God, this is helping me elevate my thinking." And I'm going, "You're a sixth grader and you're saying this to me." Like it's powerful when you put them in these type of environments. Yeah.
Like really meaningful, purposeful use of technology. We never just throw it in to do tech for the sake of tech. There's always a great meaning.
It's always the Sammer model, right?
Right.
And we're trying not to substitute. We're trying to redesign.
That's right. And you're basically saying you're not going to use technology to replace your thinking. You're going to use technology to push your thinking, which I love.
There it is.
We have to shift tremendously the school model to having kids produce more while they're in our building. There's just, my biggest complaint is just the amount of time that is wasted in education. So what you're encouraging and inspiring teachers to do is just that. Creating lessons where kids have to produce something and use their thinking and the content to do so. And that's, really the best compliment I can give you is it's the last day of school and you're pushing me to think about what I can do. I'm still a teacher. I'm still a classroom teacher. Yeah. So that I can't offer you a better compliment than that.
Well,
we have to get that message out. I think it's critical that teachers have to understand that the days of just being in the front of the classroom and talking to kids, that's not going to work. There's way more enticing things for them to look at, other than that. But
having
if they're giving
producers instead of consumers all the time.
Right. But I think what you're doing is you're really trying to explain to teachers that you have to be very meticulous and scripted and plan it out properly. You can't just say to kids, "Go do a project."
No,
this does not. This does not happen by accident.
It's very intentional. And if you haven't yet, take a look at the book and read Chris Woods's forward for us, because he talks about a project that he had jumped into with students and realized some of the hiccups that came along with that. And then by reading the parts of the book that he read, going back in, revamping, revising, and realizing, you cannot just throw it at kids in one big, direction. You have to break it down.
He likened it to a chef taking all of the ingredients and pouring them into a single recipe. He was like, that never works. So from a culinary metaphor or analogy, it just doesn't work, right? So you got to treat PBL the same way.
So for the educator who's sitting and listening to this conversation and their arms are folded and they're shaking their head no, what are the challenges that educators may face with a PBL approach, and how can they best avoid some, if not all, of those potential landmines?
I'll jump into that one. So, scaffolding learning. That's still a challenge that could present in front of you. How do we scaffold the process and the content? You still might have to put those things in place. Supporting kids in the planning process, how to break down the research for them, supporting the collaboration until, they have it really down and they know how to listen and speak to each other, bringing in reflective practice, breaking down the learning, chunking it. Know that it's not one type of instruction. You might need to do small groups, mini lessons, bring in those, multi-modalities. There might be a challenge of time management. So in our book, you'll see that we really teach our educators how to plan the experience and break it down into what we call turning points. breaking it down into small bites to put a realistic timeline on each part. Once you have that timeline worked out for you as the teacher, you then can share that with students and help them with their time management. So everything is done, very purposefully in the book so that that educator, which we have sat in front of them multiple times with them folding their arms and they're like, but this is too much. It is what inspired us to write the book. So that's why we broke it down into the 4 parts that we broke the book down into.
Yeah, so we created a 4-part framework for it. When we're looking at it, we're talking about foundational concepts, key elements, implementation and enhancement, and then assessment, evaluation, and reflection. And that kind of covers everything that would be happening within that framework. And then in that framework, you can even still go further and go small bite for each piece, because under each piece, there's different subtopics that go along with it.
And I think teaching our educators through the book of what's already in your pantry, what can you use? Like, this isn't like you have to go finding all these other resources, and we don't want you going on Teacher Pay Teachers and getting things, or finding something on Google that quite frankly isn't very good. We want you to use exactly what you have in your classroom and just think about how can you repurpose what's already there to be part of the teaching and learning that will go into the PBL experience.
So when we're thinking about this, a key or a fundamental part when we're talking about all these pitfalls, research is a huge part of what goes on in project-based learning. And so when we think about it, it's an assortment of techniques. So I'm going to go to our metaphor of the Tapas approach. Just like tapas has diverse flavors, you should have diverse research techniques or an assortment of techniques that you would work through. Most teachers are thinking it's literacy-based, the old library, go to the library and research. When we're talking about research, we're not talking about just that. We're talking about surveys and interviews. We're talking about literature and experimentation or phenomena exploration if you're in science. The idea of using explore boards with audio and visual elements that are part of it. Hands-on learning. So that sounds like a lot, right? When we're sitting back going, okay, John, that's a lot of techniques you just rattled off. But here's the approach. It's one at a time. You're not doing all of these things at once. So we know the literature base. That's the thing I'm comfortable with, or my curricular pantry, the thing I know. Well, take the one step. What's the thing you'd like to try? Is it explore boards where you want to bring in some different media aspects to help them research? Or are you going to be bringing in hands-on pieces? Or will it be case studies or interviews? Just go one by one. The whole point with PBL is the diversity, though. You want that broad range, but you're not getting there. So how do we overcome it? Small bite. Just pick 1 or 2. Practice it. You get good at it. The kids get good at it. Move to the next one. Make sure that it lines up with your learning objectives and your goals for what you're working on. It'll be a seamless transition. And then you move to the next and you move to the next. It really becomes very simple with the small bites.
And like a large product at the end can absolutely sound really overwhelming, but that's just a project. That's not PBL. What we've designed for educators is to learn how to weave in chipping away at that final product along the way. So when we say breaking learning up into turning points, it's chunking the learning. And at each chunk, you're doing a little something that will contribute to working on that public product, that authentic product for whoever you're designing for.
So the turning points are really the magic. Whenever we have planning conversations, we do agree. Whenever we have planning conversations with our colleagues, we'll lay out turning points for them. So if they're new to PBL, and we say, okay, here's the unit of study that we're working on, whatever the concept is. And then we have the turning points broken down. Typically, we have about 6 of them that we would run through. And then each one of those, it's not the project, as Tara said, that comes at the end. The project is the learning, and it's the small contribution that comes turning point by turning point by turning point. So it's these little steps along the way. I mean, I could go on and we can talk about assessment and reflection on this, because that's a huge thing that people are afraid of in PBL. And how do we, fairly assess our students with it, But
is the fear really that they can't fairly assess their students, or that they have to assess differently and they're afraid to depart from what they know?
I think that's probably so. You know what the approach is to that one, Mark? I'm glad you brought it up. So it's the traditional and the authentic. It should be both that are part of PBL. The traditional, again, let's sit in a place that we're comfortable. Tests, quiz, those should be hitting foundational concepts. You should be using those in PBL, but you should also have that authentic piece, the project itself, portfolios, presentations, where we can see how they're applying that knowledge in a real world scenario.
And too often it's like, how do I make this out of 100 is like the question. That's just not the right way to approach the problem.
Do you get more enthusiasm from elementary teachers or high school teachers, or is it a mixture?
So our role is technically K through 6. So the
Okay.
classrooms that we're living in are K through 6 classrooms. We do some in-service work with our secondary teachers, but we're not directly connected to them.
We are starting to now. We're not in their classrooms to that end, but what we're doing is we've been doing a lot of collaboration where one project we're finishing up, elementary school students were drafting prototypes for the high school students to actually fabricate. And so we have this collaborative piece. And the teachers that we've been working with on that have been very
Yeah.
enthusiastic.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're not in the classrooms the same way of elementary, but we definitely look to our secondary as collaborators. Like we have big plans for next year, bringing in big plans, bringing in some, English students and some of our, high school science students to be mentors for our younger learners. And we even have elementary teachers where we're like, hey, do you want to try this out? And, sometimes we get the wide eyes and they're like a deer in headlights because they just don't know. And it's like, trust us. Let's just do this and watch what's going to happen with your students. It truly is magical. And every single time, and I mean this 100% of the time without fail, we get to the end and we get to our PBL celebration. And that teacher looks to us and they're like, oh my goodness, I can't even believe what I'm seeing happen right now.
I think the most important thing Tara said in all of that was the idea of trust us. We're very fortunate that we have relationships with our colleagues that they do trust us and they value us and they graciously welcome us into their rooms. And so that's huge, right?
Mhm.
And you used the word interdisciplinary earlier. So especially, in elementary school, that's very easy to implement. But do you think that most of the PBL work, at least in elementary, should be interdisciplinary in nature?
I think as much as possible.
I think that when you're starting off, when we think of that kitchen thermometer approach that we talked about at the very beginning, if you're starting at the very beginning and you're starting off, choose one subject area and infuse elements of interdisciplinary work. So if you're working in science and you want to bring in elements of ELA to kind of support or math to support, it's a great way to start. Ideally, at the end, you're looking for that magical experience that's truly interdisciplinary and you got all these different pieces that are part of it.
I do have to compliment, though, a recent high school teacher that we did work with in a PBL they did interdisciplinary work. They actually collaborated with the music teacher. They were a manufacturing class, a tech ed teacher, and ended up collaborating with the music teacher for support in, producing percussion instruments for the hospital. It was awesome.
Wow.
That's great.
But you nailed it on the head with the idea of elementary. It's a little bit easier if you're not departmentalized. But when you are departmentalized or you're in middle schools or high schools, then you certainly you have a challenge because you need to make sure you're collaborating with your peers in order to do that.
I think one of the reasons why the teachers trust you is because you're only asking them to take a taste. You're not asking them to consume the whole thing. And people are more trusting when they know that they have a small commitment up front.
That, it's interesting to think about it. I'm thinking of the relationships, but you're right. I guess the way we're framing it in the long run is that we're not asking for a massive commitment from you. We're asking for this. Yeah, just give it a try.
Yeah. Take one elemental piece. That's how we started.
I mean, we even talk in the book, to be honest with you. We understand that everyone's going to advocate for their methodologies, right? We get that. And you're going to have theorists who are yelling on one side of a camp versus theorists on another side of a camp. And we sit back and we say, we understand this. And we know that there's diverse needs in students and teachers alike out there. And what we're really looking at is we have seen power in this, and we have seen change in student learning outcomes, engagement, teacher enthusiasm,
and student identity. Like student identity is a really big thing. Like, who am I? And I think that through these learning experiences, they start to learn who they are and where their strengths are, what they can grow at. I mean, bringing in, John had talked earlier about authentic job roles. we don't pick those roles. We don't encourage teachers to pick that for their students. We encourage our students to choose the role that you think best fits you and your strengths and your personality. And so far, we have not had a student that we had to, persuade to pick a different role. They know it helps them build who they are.
What I would say is we understand there's these different methodologies and everyone's going to advocate for what they want. We're just saying, you give this a try and we'll promise you, when you start to see the impact of it, there is no looking back. There is no looking at other learning arrangements for my kids.
Such a great rapport with each other. It's really,
Oh, thanks. I know,
yes.
that's okay. He usually tries to steal, you're going to cut this, right? He tries to steal my words. And then he says, I try to steal his words. And
You can actually leave this on here. I would be okay if it was actually even on
It
the
really
podcast.
is.
Whatever you like.
It is funny.
We
No, but
do though. We do like talking over each other.
we do, definitely. Even our spouses will be like, oh my goodness, you guys just interrupt each other all the time. It's
But I don't think you do. I actually think you interject at like the perfect time. I think
no.
it'd be great to watch you like model project-based learning teaching as a team teaching classroom.
Listen, I always say to him,
Well,
if
we
you
weren't-
ever send me back to a classroom, you better send, like, I'll go back to special ed because I was a special ed teacher. I'll be the co-teacher. John could be the gen ed teacher, and let's run a class together. We always joke if they ever like cut our position.
We were actually in a classroom together at one point.
We were,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
like a year and a couple of months.
Yep.
We were, because he was my STEAM professional development specialist. He was my instructional coach, and we did, and it was very natural from the start.
It was
for
easy.
us.
It was
Mhm.
easy.
And that's the model when I'm just envisioning all the things that you're inspiring me to do for next year. Any of my co-teaching pairs, it's so much better if you have two people in the room to help facilitate this than if you
Right.
have one. There's just so much more opportunities for the teachers to be able to implement it, I think. And again, I'm talking more on the high school level.
You mentioned theory and theorists before, John. It just got me thinking, with all due respect to the theory and the theorists, things are changing so rapidly for all of us in the classroom and on the front lines. There's no way that the theory has caught up, and there's no way that it can. I mean, 20 months ago, ChatGPT didn't exist.
Right.
So there's no way that there's a body of work already ready to inform us on how to best react to it. So we don't have the luxury of waiting. Our kids are showing up right now. So the bell's ringing and we have to get going. And like you mentioned previously, engagement is so difficult to come by now. We have to be willing to use any tool in the toolbox to engage students as much as we possibly can, because the forces of distraction are coming for all of our students. And if we're not up to the task, we're going to lose them. We already are.
Mhm.
So we are a little bit behind in the fight. So we really have to kind of marshal our forces, circle the wagons, pick your metaphor, and and really get with something, whether it's PBL or anything else. But we have to work on engagement as if it's it's our last stand, because in some ways, it really is.
I agree.
Couldn't agree more.
I definitely agree.
I do think your publisher will be very happy with your book and Mark's book, because they really are complementing each other very, very nicely.
We love Codebreaker.
Codebreaker,
They're good to us.
They are phenomenal. They have been amazing to
Definitely a
work with.
Codebreaker shout out for sure.
There we go. I was
Yeah.
just going to say, let's give them a shout out because they were awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes,
Yep.
Do
it.
events can be just serendipitous. And when you were talking about, us as presenters and writing this book together, I think that our work together as classroom teacher coach into being in this position, into, presenting together at conferences, getting inspired to write the book, to meeting Brian and Daphne at Codebreakers, our journey has been very serendipitous. And we're just really grateful for all of the people along the way that contributed to all of that. Our teachers, our administrators, like we said, our board of ed, meeting you guys,
Absolutely.
all of it.
Well, I commend and congratulate both of you, because I really think, I would say for the first time in my career, I've listened to somebody talk about project-based learning in a way, like I said to you earlier, that really inspired me and also kind of clarified for me the approach I think I need to take. And I think that's the best compliment I could offer you.
Thank you so much, Nick.
Nick, I was just going to say, I don't know that I take compliments well, but that means a lot. Thank you.
And that was
And my wife is a kindergarten teacher, and I'm going to give her a copy of your book because she's going to devour it over the summer.
Listen, have her
That's right.
reach out. One of
The
my
little ones are fun.
favorite BBLs I've done is pinball machines with kindergartners using force and motion knowledge, transferring that knowledge into creating pinball machines.
You understand I'm going to be at Home Depot about 4 days from now.
You have to,
getting the material.
There's a way you can spread the wealth, Mark. There's a way you spread the wealth.
Yes.
No, you have to understand, Mark's wife is not a kindergarten teacher. She is the kindergarten teacher.
Okay.
There is nobody who works as hard and is as talented as she is.
Oh, that's awesome. I taught kindergarten a couple of years, so I could probably learn something from her.
She will gobble this up.
Yeah. Now Mark's credit card bill will be a little bit different.
Yeah. Do I just forward my check to Home Depot at this point? Or are there electronics involved? Do I need a soldering iron? You just let me know.
Nope. You actually,
No.
yeah, very low tech project for this one.
Very makers-esque.
Yes.
That's
Low
great.
tech, but not low expense. I noticed that you left that part out, but that's okay.
No, I'm telling you, recyclables. You have to see what these kids were able to produce with their families without spending a dime.
No, and a lot of the projects that we work on, I mean, we're fortunate. She's talking about the K project. We have we're fortunate that our high school has a manufacturing, so we use that where we can create a tangible product. But a lot of the things that we'll work with will be digital as well because they cost nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just going into the platforms and how cleverly you use your different tech tools to create products for kids, more for people. But makers challenges as well, recyclable items, and how you can make pretty legit prototypes out of these things, you know?
Something tells me I will be.
Your wife,
tell her to give us a call.
If she's the kindergarten teacher, she's going to be like, no recyclables. Go to Home Depot.
Yes. And my mother-in-law thanks you as well because she'll be recruited somehow into this. I have no doubt.
You're going to have an assembly line in your kitchen table working on stuff.
Yeah, it'll violate all like the Factory Act of 1833 and everything else. Yeah.
OSHA is out of the way. OSHA
They'll be knocking on the door.
Doesn't exist in your house, right?
Awesome.
I just want to thank both of you. This was a great conversation, inspiring, enlightening, very clear, and your passion is so apparent. I think you genuinely want teachers to be supported and to do a better job of engaging kids during a very challenging time. And I'm sure Mark feels the same way.
Absolutely.
So thank you for listening. Please follow us wherever you would get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Amazon. You could also find us on the web, stateofedpodcast.com, where you'll find the links to what we've discussed. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Tara and John's book, The Tapas Approach to Project-Based Learning, a culinary map for educators on the transformative power of PBL. And please pick up a copy of Mark Issex's book, Forward Fast, Making Sense of Education in an Era of Rapid Change. And I am excited to announce that Mark will be releasing his new book shortly, Captivate, and he will be dropping the cover to that soon. And it is an amazing book. Thank you, everyone.
No, thank you.
Thank you.